Hey everyone, happy Tuesday. So great to have so many of you here. We're just getting started and I'll give people another minute or two to kind of get settled in before we get going. I want to say thank you so much everyone for all of the amazing messages in the chat box. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. I am so excited to be able to spend some time here with all of you today. I'm really excited about it. And I hope that this kind of special edition of Summer Fundraising is really interesting for all of you who are here. As we get started, I'd love to have you say hello in the chat. Let me know you're here. If you haven't already said hello, it's always great to see who's joining us. And it seems like there are a lot of folks tuning in. I'm really glad to have all of you here. A couple of quick kind of housekeeping things too before we get started, just to let you know about. If you feel so inclined and would like to share this with folks, there is a little share button just below this video. I think it's on your screen, probably on the right-hand side. You'll see it says share. And you're welcome to share this video on social media if you'd like, or through email if you have colleagues who you think would enjoy it, feel free to do that. For those of you who are tuning in over on Facebook Live, hello and welcome. Glad you could be here as well. If you'd like to join us over on Crowdcast, which is more of where the chat box and questions are happening, you can go to crowdcast.io/Vanessa Chase and you'll find a listing for it there. So what are we doing here today? We're all here for Summer Fundraising, which is my weekly live broadcast where we talk about summer fundraising and inspiration, and I'm really glad so many of you are here today. Today's topic, I chose for a couple of reasons. So, as many of you probably know, based on the chat box, it is in fact my birthday today. And I thought it would be really fun to just kind of do a bit of a personal review with all of you of lessons I've learned about fundraising and a few things about life this last year. It's been an interesting and strange year for me, as I'm sure you'll hear about. But one of the things I've done for, let's see, the last probably four years at least now, is every year on my birthday, I generally publish a long reflective essay on the blog about just things that are happening in my life and things I've learned about fundraising in the last year. And this year I thought, since we're doing these broadcasts, maybe I would change it up a little bit and do something different this year. Although I may very well write something later this week, who knows? So if you've read this before, you probably know the general gist of what I might kind of share what it's about. If you haven't before and you're new to the storytelling nonprofit community, welcome. I'm really glad you're here. I also think that for me, being able to kind of just take these moments to pause and reflect are always really important to me. I feel like there are the times when I'm really able to process what's going on and try to learn from all the things that have been happening. And I'd be curious to know if any of you also kind of take, I guess what I would call reflection breaks during your year, whether it's at a birthday or New Year's, or maybe some other sort of significant date for you. If you do, let me know. I would love to hear about how you kind of go through that process as well. For me, it's generally on my birthday, although I sometimes do some reflecting at other times of the years as well. And a lot of what I learned about reflection and sort of these reflective breaks that I take has come from a really wonderful book that I would love to share with you all. It's called The Women's Retreat Book. It's by Jennifer Loden. I'll type it in the chat box in case any of you are interested. It's a fantastic book. I love Jennifer Loden's work in general. Let's see if I can spell this right. There we go. So it's called The Women's Retreat Book. It's really wonderful. It's this fantastic kind of guide and sort of, I guess, self-study guide to figuring out how to run retreats for yourself. And by retreat, it might be, an hour, could be several days if you go somewhere, whatever it is, but it's really about being able to kind of carve out meaningful time for yourself to reflect and think about whatever it is you want to think about. And that book has been super helpful for me in the last couple of years. And if any of you are into this sort of thing, reflecting, liking to take breaks or retreats or things like this, you might really enjoy this book. It's fantastic. So where am I going with all this? I feel like I'm going on a bit of a tangent. So what I'd like to do here today, since we're getting started with summer fundraising in this episode, is take a little bit of time to share some lessons I've learned about fundraising this year. I'm going to start with those because I know a lot of you are probably here for those more than you are to hear about sort of lessons I've learned in my personal life this year. So I thought I would start with the fundraising lessons first. And if you feel so inclined and want to stick around to hear a little bit more about lessons I personally learned outside of fundraising, I'll probably do that a little bit later in the episode. I suspect we're going to go until about 12:30 or so, somewhere in there, 12:45. And as always, I'm happy to answer questions. I saw a really wonderful question from Madeline come in who wanted to know a little bit more about my own career journey. and what experiences I've done to sort of benefit myself in my career development. And I'm really happy to talk about that. So I will definitely get to that question a little bit later on. And we'll answer any other questions you all have as well if there's ones that come up. So let's go ahead and get into it. So when I started to distill down lessons I've learned from fundraising this year, I kind of came up with 5 central ones. And there's probably a lot more too, but I thought I would start with these 5 and we'll see where this takes us. The first one, and I thought this is hopefully to be really salient for a lot of you, I know it is for me, is that momentum is everything in fundraising. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So I really learned both as really a one-person shop in a business and also working in a lot of other smaller organizations and working with some of my coaching clients this year who are also small organizations, that one of the things that really helps them to stay on track with their fundraising and ultimately make a lot of progress is feeling like they've got that kind of momentum going. And that's because it's really easy to focus on the big goals that we have, right? Those big annual goals where we know we've got to raise X amount of money or do whatever it is, whatever other goals we maybe set out for ourselves. But sometimes those big goals are not motivating enough to us on a weekly or daily basis. And so we've got to find ways to find some other momentum to keep working towards that goal. And one of the ways that I personally found momentum for myself in my own work and with some of my clients as well has been being able to start sort of a daily practice of keeping track of things that are going well or things that I feel like are sort of wins, so to speak. So one of the things that I do oftentimes is at the end of the day, as I kind of close up my office and head out for the rest of the evening, I will take just a couple minutes at the end of the day to write down 3 sort of wins that I've had. And they can be anything from small things like figuring out, how to make my CRM work better or being able to figure out something new with email marketing or having a really great client win, something like that. And I did this as a fundraiser too, and it could have been something as simple as, being able to meet with a donor that day, or I finally got a meeting with someone that I really wanted to meet with, or copy got approved. It can really be those little things, but tracking them in a notebook and being able to visibly see those over time is so, so important because you actually can see the progress that you're making. And I feel like that gives you that sense of internal momentum to keep moving towards those goals and feel like you've really got some traction going. So I wanted to share that with you all because I think so much about fundraising and the success in it is feeling like you can keep going because there's always a lot of work to do. There's always a lot of things that need to happen. And really feeling like you have that momentum behind you to just sort of keep going and keep moving forward is so important. And I think that's one of the big things I've personally taken away this year from my work and some of the fundraising work I do is that we need to kind of feel that momentum and be able to move with it to keep on track and keep going towards some of those goals. So that was the first one I want to share. And I've got a few notes about some of the other ones. The second one I wanted to share was sometimes you don't always need to reinvent the wheel. And I know some of you might be thinking, Vanessa, that's really obvious. But I feel like this is a lesson I keep learning over and over again, which is that sometimes we have fundraising tactics and things that work for our organizations or things that really work industry-wide as a best practice. And yet there will be new trends or new technologies that come up and we kind of get what I would call shiny object syndrome, where we like run in the opposite direction and do this other thing. And we maybe forget about these things that we have been doing that are still really working well. And so I always like to remind clients, and I like to remind myself too, that when you've got something that's working already, you don't need to reinvent the wheel with it. You don't need to, create brand new strategies or take your fundraising plan in a totally different direction. If you've got something that's going well and working for you as a strategy, keep doing that. Keep on it. Don't feel like you have to try all these new fancy things that are out there or radically change up what you're doing if what you're doing is working really well. And I think also the same thing goes for, developing new strategies as well. If you're kind of in that place where you're expanding or thinking about new avenues for your fundraising program, you can take a cue from what others have done, learn from them, learn from their mistakes, learn from what's worked, and use that as a kind of springboard to be able to ultimately develop your own strategy and learn from what others have done around you. And I think that's where peer learning and peer knowledge exchange can be such a powerful tool for our organizations. I know one of the pieces of advice that my dad has given me for years has been something along the lines of, ride multiple horses until you see which one is the clear winner. And what he always means by that is that sometimes we don't always know what's going to pan out for us in terms of strategies or projects we're working on. And it's really easy sometimes to stick our eggs all in one basket, right? And think that like, this is the thing we want to work on and we're going to just give it our all and make sure it turns out as best as it can. And his point to me has always been, you never really know what sort of circumstances or, unexpected things are going to come up in life, right? And so it's good to have kind of multiple things that you're working on or multiple things that you're trying. And I think that can be true in fundraising too. One of the things that I often see happen with some of my clients is they see new technology or new strategy and they immediately want to use it. They immediately want to shift away from whatever they were doing before. And being able to ultimately try this new thing out. And what they do there is they, one, forget that it takes time to sometimes see an uptick in this new strategy or new idea that they're implementing. And two, they also forget that they've got this other thing that's working that needs to kind of keep going to kind of fill in that time between the old strategy not working anymore and the new strategy fully working. Hopefully that makes sense. But I always think about there being kind of this like uptick or sort of learning curve where we start trying something, we try something new, but sometimes it'll take a while for it to get to the same level as this other thing that we have been doing for a while. And probably the best concrete example I can give you of that is organizations I see who are transitioning from sort of from an offline strategy to a digital strategy where they're really moving from direct mail or print pieces and wanting to shift to online fundraising and email fundraising, things like that. It never happens overnight. It often takes a lot of time and a lot of resources to lay the foundation for that to really occur and for you to start to see this sort of similar revenue generation in the same way that you saw in your print sort of fundraising strategy for a long time. And I always like to remind people about that because it's not that it's not going to work, it's just going to take time. And sometimes we have to account for that difference, if that makes sense. And I guess if I had to kind of sum this all up around not reinventing the wheel, which was originally my point here, is that, it's great to see all sorts of new technology and strategies happening out there for our organizations and for fundraising. But I would really encourage you to just not discount what's working for your donor audience, because what works for your donor audience is ultimately what you want to keep doing. And that's the wheel you do not need to reinvent. When you start to see changes in behavior or in giving patterns, that's when you need to start looking and making some of those shifts. But until you start to see real hard evidence of that, there's not a huge need to radically change your plans. All right, so that's what I wanted to say about that. Hopefully that made sense. If it doesn't, feel free to ask me questions. Happy to clarify some of these things. 3, I think consistency may be the key to survival in this sort of landscape of nonprofit fundraising. And I've thought a lot about this over the last year, just about what it means to really be consistent and be consistently excellent at what you do. Whether it's communications or fundraising, or if you're in a leadership position as an executive director. Part of what I think is so challenging for a lot of organizations is that there are really a sea of nonprofits out there, right? And one of your key challenges is figuring out how you stand out from the crowd, how you keep people around as donors, et cetera. Probably sounds familiar. And I think that one of the sort of things that organizations often do that gives them a leg up on others is their dedication to being consistent. Whether that's consistently showing up, consistently getting out to meetings, consistently doing outreach and education in the community, consistently creating great content and iterating on that. Consistency is one of the things that will ultimately make up for a lack of other resources, in that you're able to really dedicate and continue to do the work over time. And I think that this is such an important point that I personally think about a lot, because there's so many factors that can impact our success. And one of the ones I think often that gets people is that they are not consistent enough with what they do, whether it's, asking for money consistently, stewarding people consistently, telling stories consistently, whatever that is. There's often, gaps for whatever reason, whether it's resources or lack of time. But I think when you really narrow down what your priorities are and you get consistent about those key priorities, you really can not only create that momentum for yourself, but also do the things that lead to building relationships. And I think that that's the point I really want to underscore about consistency, is that when you are consistent with these things, that's when you're going to be able to build high quality relationships with people in your community by consistently talking to them, consistently showing up, consistently going out for meetings, whatever that might be in your particular role. But consistency is one of those things that I just keep circling back to over this year, because it really is such an important thing that we have to be focused on in our work, is being able to do it consistently and at hopefully a really excellent level. And I think the other thing too, as I said, if you are consistent, what you're ultimately able to do is build those relationships over time, and hopefully that leads to long-term sustainability. So that's kind of the chain of things that I see in my mind, which is the consistency, relationship building, sustainability. I don't know if that's actually as easy as it sounds. Who knows? It's probably not. But I really do like to think that sort of consistency is this sort of bedrock or foundation that can lead us down this path of other really excellent milestones to our organization's success in the long term. So that's what I've been thinking about, those three things. Two other ones I'll share with you. I'm just going to glance down at my notes so I don't forget any of them. This next one, I feel like may be controversial. Who knows? We'll see where it goes. But I think one of the things that's really come up for me, especially since my husband, who's also my business partner, we work with some political and advocacy organizations. But also I work with, as many of you know, a lot of social service, healthcare, and higher education groups. I've seen across the board, for better or for worse, and this is my fourth point, politics may be unavoidable in this current climate. And I say this gently, and many of you probably have some idea of my own personal politics based on things I've written, especially after International Women's Day. But I think that there's really something to think about this, or something to think about here, because a lot of organizations will avoid talking about politics with donors or taking a stand on anything, especially those who are more traditional nonprofits in the US. You're probably a 501c3, for instance, or in Canada, social service or healthcare, someone who doesn't explicitly do advocacy work. But the thing that I want to say here is that I think in this current political climate, people are so polarized in their values and their political beliefs. And it's really seeping into so many aspects of culture and interaction with people that it may very well be unavoidable for your organization to have these kinds of conversations with donors, to have an opinion sometimes where appropriate or where it makes sense, where it kind of lines up with your work naturally. And you may have to take an uncomfortable stance. You may have to make some people unhappy. It may be a point now where your organization can't necessarily appeal to everyone, especially if there are political things happening that connect to your work where it's really necessary for you to take a stand and have an opinion about them. I think, probably a good example that I can think of was some of the funding cuts that were happening to Meals on Wheels earlier in the year. I know they do advocacy. I've worked with them before, but it's never been that explicit or really out publicly. And suddenly they were really forced to show their hand and to talk about their political beliefs and their advocacy policies and things like that towards senior funding and healthcare and meal care, and also just long-term social care of seniors. There may be instances more like that, I think, that we'll start seeing with organizations, depending on how things unfold. But I think it's something to keep in mind, because what I see happen oftentimes is organizations really avoid the topic of politics, which, fair enough, people have lots of strong opinions about it these days. But it may be that when your organization decides to take a values or political stand about something, you will really uncover who your true supporter base actually is. And it may be okay that some people fall apart. Maybe you'll have fewer donors, maybe you'll have, less following on social media, but you may actually have a better, smaller community of people who truly have aligned values and beliefs with your organization. And I think that may be worth a lot more than having sort of the quantity over the quality of those relationships. So that's what I wanted to say about that. I don't necessarily think it's a terrible thing that is unavoidable. I think it could be a good thing for some organizations who have historically had sort of a bland presence or voice about what it is they take a stand on. Politics may give you an opportunity to polarize people a little bit more in a way that's both productive and really useful to your organization. And I think that leads me nicely into the last thing I wanted to say that I learned about fundraising this year, which is that I think the real power of storytelling lies in its ability to build community. And I feel like I've maybe said this in other years or talked about it in other ways, but I've kind of come back again to it again this year. Because I always think about, what is the real value of telling a story? So often you'll hear other people be like, oh, well, it helps you raise money. And I'm sure I've said that before, but there is a lot of value to telling stories. And to me, I really think that the deeper value lies in stories' ability to connect people through emotion, through experience, through values, through politics, whatever that is, whatever the kind of through thread is of all of those things. And being able to help people connect over very fundamental things. That's really the basis of the kind of community your organization is building. And in this very digital day and age, I think people are looking more and more for a community that they can meaningfully connect with and hopefully be able to really, just find a tribe of people who are like-minded, who share some similarities with them. And your organization and the stories you tell, the stories that you foster can really be that sort of spoke in the hub of the community that you might be building. And to me, when I think about sort of trends in storytelling and trends in fundraising, I really hope this is one direction things go. I feel like I've seen it in a few different ways in the last few years, which is that, really nonprofits and fundraising teams understanding themselves as community builders, not just a fundraising machine. And I think that this is such a powerful perspective to take on fundraising because it means that we can sort of build a cohesive, tight network of people who not only know you and your organization, but who know each other and who have those existing relationships and other ways of relating to your cause besides just knowing your organization. I think that's really important and really valuable. I talk all the time about how I think one of the most important things stories do is communicate values. And maybe this relates back to the last point I made about the political climate, which is that, having clear values that you articulate through stories might be one of the best ways for people to ultimately connect with your organization. And the more that you communicate those values over time, what it is you stand for, what it is you believe, the more people can connect with that and the more people you brought into your community on such a fundamental level, which is so important. And I know for a lot of organizations that I've worked with over the years, they often think, what values do we really have? We're not doing advocacy, we're not doing political work. It's not highly apparent. And maybe you have a values statement that you feel like is not that great or just it's not really telling, right? So I really encourage people to kind of peel back the layers and think about what is it that you're taking a stand for? What is it that your organization really believes? What is it about the way you approach your work that's different from how other organizations approach theirs? And I think that last question is really helpful, especially if you find you're in sort of a niche or sort of an area where there's lots of other similar organizations. Education and healthcare are both good examples, so are social service and many others. But you think about other organizations who are similar to yours and think about, what is it that you do differently? How are you unique compared to others? I think about the Rape Crisis Center I work with here in Vancouver. There's many other sort of crisis services in Vancouver, whether it's for domestic violence or rape crisis or sexual assault, things like that. What makes the one that I work with really unique is that they constantly talk about themselves as being an explicitly feminist rape crisis center. And that's one of the ways and one of the things that makes them really unique. And while the idea of feminism can be really polarizing, they've actually used it as a real community building value to bring people in who also believe that, who believe that that's a valuable approach to take to counseling and anti-violence work. And so that's been really powerful for them. And it could be very powerful for your organization. Who knows? And if you think about this and you have thoughts on it or ideas down the road, I'd love to hear how that turns out and what sort of things your organization might be thinking about there. Let's see. All right, so those are the 5 points I wanted to share around sort of fundraising lessons learned. We're doing okay for time. I'm going to keep going. That's okay with everyone else. And I wanted to switch gears a little bit into more sort of personal life lessons I've learned this year. And I suspect it may be a little difficult for me to get through these, so we'll see how it goes. There's a couple that I wanted to share with you all, and they are much more personal. I've talked about them sort of, but not really that explicitly. And I want to say they all are sort of under one umbrella. There's sort of one unifying thing that ties all of these lessons together. And it was really the result of the accident that I had last summer. Some of you might know this. I had sort of a freak accident in July last year. I fell head first and face first onto the sidewalk. It was very painful, I can assure you of that. And I have been dealing with a concussion for almost 11 months now since that accident, and it's gotten much better. I'm feeling on the whole probably like 90 to 95% better than I was for a while, but it really did sort of make me stop in a lot of ways because it was just so severe and so difficult to deal with. But one of the things that I've come to appreciate now that I've sort of started to process that experience a little bit more, and also you worked through some of the PTSD that I had after my accident, was that my concussion in a lot of ways has been one of my greatest teachers this year. It's taught me a lot of lessons, mostly because it's just been so wildly disruptive to my life. And any of you who have had, severe sort of injuries or even concussions probably know this, that, it can really sort of disrupt your regular life pattern and brings to light a lot of sometimes scary existential questions, but also just things that maybe you hadn't noticed before. And I think that that's really what this last year has been about for me in a lot of ways. So there's a couple things that I've kind of learned coming out of this experience, since it's been almost a year now, that I thought I would share with you. Certainly, I think the biggest one for me is that sometimes the best self-care that you can do is to literally just hit the pause button. There are so many times when self-care and regular self-care rituals are really great for us, right? When we're just sort of managing our day-to-day lives. But I think sometimes when we're in crisis or when there's real stress happening for us, sometimes the best thing we can do is just stop. And I feel like this is what happened to me probably a month or so after the accident, after my concussion sort of set in. I was really in denial about how bad it was and thought that I could still be working and still kind of carrying on at my normal pace, which was not at all the case. And really the best thing I could do was stop and rest and sort of rein in my commitments, step back from a lot of things that I had said yes to, which was really difficult for me. I hate going back on things I've committed to. But it was really necessary for me to take care of myself that way. And I never really considered that being a kind of self-care before, being able to literally say no to everything for months and months and months and just be able to rest and recover and give myself the time that I needed to be able to do that. And it was so important. And it's something that I think I'm really appreciating as another way of taking care of myself, and hopefully something that maybe some of you can learn from if you ever encounter something like this, although I hope you won't, because it was a really terrible experience. And kind of tangentially, or related to that rather, the other thing that I feel like I really learned coming out of that experience of having to really stop for so many months was that it's actually okay for me to take my foot off the accelerator. And I say this, and this was probably the hardest lesson for me to learn, I think, because I am such a type A personality, and I really value being productive and getting stuff done and being busy and doing the things that I like and living, a fairly full life. It was really hard for me to stop pressing down on the accelerator all the time and to have to pause and be like, okay, I don't have to go so fast all the time. And what was interesting to me was that it kind of bred some really interesting lessons. One was that if I stopped working so hard, I always worried that, my business would somehow like magically fall apart or something, which it certainly didn't. And I actually learned that it was okay for me to stop working so hard. I didn't have to be such a slave driver to myself, and I could rest and take breaks and pace myself in a way that would be much more sustainable over the long term. And it really sort of demystified this myth that I had in my head for so long, that if I stopped working at 110% all the time, things would just fall apart. They didn't fall apart. And in fact, I want to say that they're better now on the other side. So for those of you who are also really hard workers, who really push yourself every single day, I want to say that if you stop, even just a little, things are not going to fall apart. It's not going to be terrible. And in fact, it might be better for you. You might be able to do better work. You might be more creative. You might have more space in your life for other things that you really want to do. And I think that that's sort of been what's kind of come out of that experience for me, is being able to realize that there's other things that I wanted to do, in terms of my own creativity and work, and having the space to do that and actually think about those things has been really rewarding for me. Related to that, I think the other thing that I really learned that was really difficult for me was after sort of taking my foot off the accelerator and slowing down a little with work for a few months, I really had to struggle with my sense of self-worth for a while. And the thing that kind of came out of this for me was really sort of the lesson that I think a lot of us have to learn the hard way sometimes, which was that my worth and value as a person was not tied to my outputs or my work. And this was really difficult because so much of, I think, my identity as a person and as an individual is tied up in the work that I do in the storytelling nonprofit and the business that I have. And suddenly not working at the level that I was before was really difficult. I felt like I just felt like I wasn't myself. I wasn't the person that I'd always known myself to be. I felt, sort of useless sometimes, and it was really difficult for me to wrap my head around that. But I think one of the things that I've learned that's actually been really healthy for me is that, my value and my worth is not at all tied to those things. And being able to untangle those things, my work and my worth has been so, so valuable for me in so many ways. And I think if there's one sort of big lesson that I hope sticks longer than this year, it's definitely that one, that, my self-worth is not always going to be so intertwined with my work. And it's okay if I sort of detangle them and get to know these other facets of myself and value those as much, if not more, than the work that I do. All right, last one I want to share, and then I'm going to answer some questions because I saw a few that came in. The last thing that I think kind of came out of this lessons I've learned from my concussion this last year has been to stop waiting and just start, which might be kind of contradictory to some of the things I've already said, but I should add the caveat, start when you feel well, when you're feeling healthy. But this is something that I think I learned a couple of years ago when I started the storytelling nonprofit and started my consulting practice, which was that, there's never, ever a perfect time in life for things to magically start happening. The stars are not perfectly going to align. There's never going to be a perfect set of circumstances for you to do what it is you want to do, whether it's in your work or your personal life. And you've got to just overcome that. You've got to just decide to start and not keep waiting, because if you keep waiting for things to be perfect or be exactly how you hope they'll be, sort of ideal circumstances, so to speak, you might be waiting forever. And, you ultimately let life in a lot of ways pass you by. And I know that might sound really sort of cheesy, but I think it's one of the things that sticks with me all the time. And one of the things that really helps me live a life that's really meaningful is not waiting for things to happen and not waiting for circumstances to be perfect or for whatever. There's lots of things we end up waiting for, whether it's, letting go of our beliefs or, values or stories we tell ourselves. Being able to just start is sometimes the best thing you can do. And I know a lot of times people have a lot of fear around starting new projects, new work, a new job, because of fear of failure or not having enough information or not knowing what you're going to do. But I have to say, there's such a value in the idea of learning as you go and being a beginner in things that will really help you find a lot of momentum and help you get better over time. No one is perfect when they start something new. I definitely am not. And I have to say, that's what comes with time, is learning lessons, getting better, continuing to develop yourself and your career. And ultimately, you'll be able to find that sort of deeper sense of satisfaction, knowing that you've truly pursued projects and meaningful work to you that's really enriched your life in a very positive way. So those were a couple of things that I want to share with you. I know we've gone on for quite a little while here. I wanted to say I really appreciate some of the messages that you've sent in the chat box. Thank you so much. I agree with you, Emily. Boundaries are really important. And I think that for me is a lesson also that maybe I keep learning over and over again. It's funny because I think prior to my accident last year, I thought I had really good boundaries with work. I was always really good at, shutting down my email on the weekends and not checking email and things like that. But I realized those were small boundaries and there were some bigger ones that maybe I needed to work on. And it's been really, kind of forced exercise in that, but it's also been a really productive one, I think. So I saw a couple of questions come in. I want to answer those. So if any of you would like to stick around for a couple more minutes, we'll probably go for another 5 minutes or so and then we'll wrap up. But I did just want to answer Madeline's question. She said she's a young professional in fundraising and would love to hear about my career journey, what kinds of experiences led to further career development, what sort of activities and opportunities outside of work benefit a young professional looking to grow in the field. Absolutely. And maybe this will also be helpful for those of you who are not new in your careers, but you're just thinking about your own personal career development. So I don't know if I've ever actually told the full story of this. I kind of haphazardly ended up in fundraising right out of college 8 years ago now, 7, 8 years ago, something like that. And I kind of fell into fundraising. It was one of the jobs that I got offered out of school, and I took it because it sounded interesting, and it turned out to be a really great fit for me, very fortunately. And I think when I first got immersed into fundraising, just learning the lay of the landscape was really useful. Figuring out, all the different types of fundraising that happened. At the time, I was working in an annual giving office in higher education, which is a very specific kind of fundraising. And so learning a little bit more about all the types of fundraising that organizations do, about what it means to market and communicate and run a nonprofit. Those were all sort of useful readings and things like that I did. I remember at the time subscribing to a lot of different fundraising blogs and reading those on a regular basis. And occasionally attending webinars and things like that with my colleagues. But I think one of the things that was really helpful for me, and I was very fortunate at that time to have a really wonderful manager, Suzanne, who I think is still there at UBC. I like her a lot. She, in both years that I was there, when we did my performance review, was really committed to helping me figure out a professional development plan for myself and talking to me about my own career goals, things that I wanted to learn and get better at. And how they as a department could support that, but also what I can think about doing outside of work as well. So sort of doing that exercise for yourself might be really helpful, Madeline, and for all those of you who are also listening in as well. So think about, what are the sort of skills that you want to develop? What are your own sort of long-term goals or vision for your career? Do you want to ultimately run a nonprofit? Do you want to be a director of development somewhere? What type of organization do you want to work at? Do you want to specialize in a kind of fundraising, maybe like planned giving or something like that? I know for me, one of the things I knew and I was very clear about and still am was that I really loved communications and I liked the writing and fundraising, and I wanted to be able to more specialize in that than go into something like major gifts, for instance. Although I did end up dabbling in that for a while. And so I knew that one of the things I wanted to do was get better at copywriting, learn more about the principles of compelling writing. And so I read a lot of books that year. I learned a lot about advertising copywriting, which is tangential to fundraising, but there are a lot of really useful principles in that kind of persuasive writing that were really helpful to me. And just learning a little bit more about the mechanics of fundraising writing, because it is a different kind of genre, so to speak. So that's what I personally did that year. Now, just based on where I currently am in my career, which is a little different than it was a few years ago, I really think about developing myself in ways that are bigger than just my fundraising skills. Yes, I certainly still do a lot of skills development on fundraising and communications, because that's really important to me and something I'm personally always interested in. But I also want to look at other things too. Like I'm always really curious about, improving my own communication skills with people. I have a tendency to sometimes be a little conflict avoidant. So one of the things I personally worked on the last couple of years is learning how to be productively confrontational with people. Maybe confrontational isn't the right word, but being able to work through conflict, even though I feel vulnerable, and being able to kind of get to the other side of that. I also, for a long time, had this story that I was a really bad manager, that I couldn't manage people and that I was not good at managing teams or things like that. And that's something I've really worked on, sort of taking away from my own sort of stories that I have, and being able to learn about what it is to be a good manager, working with peers who manage teams, talking to them about how they manage their staffs or contractors, things like that. And being able to just learn a little bit more about that has been really helpful. So those are all sort of goals that I have for myself, things that I'm working on. I'm going to take some time a little later today to think about what my sort of personal goals are for this upcoming year. And I'd be happy to share them with you all, maybe in an upcoming email or something, and just let you know a little bit more about my own professional development plan for the year. And I can certainly share that. You know, there's so many great resources, and I know some of you probably know this about me, but I'm really into personal development. And so there's lots of other blogs and books that I read that are not at all nonprofit related, that are really about my own personal development, that are always a part of what I'm working on and what I'm doing. Yeah, so Stephanie, you asked, what are some books on compelling fundraising copywriting? Yeah, there are so many. Let's see, I'm going to type in a couple for you. Anything by Jeff Brooks, I would say, is really great. Jeff wrote A Fundraiser's Guide to Irresistible Communications a couple of years ago. That's a great book to start with. He also wrote a book, I think last year, called Turning Words into Money, which is all about writing fundraising copy. Tom Ahern also has, I'll put these names in here. You can find these books on Amazon. Sometimes they can be a little expensive. I have to say, I found a lot of local libraries have these books too, so you might be able to check them out if you don't want to pay for them right away. Tom Ahern has a lot of books on fundraising. One of his is called, I'm just going to see if I can find it on my shelf. I think it's called Writing Fundraising Materials. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. It's really just about kind of the general advice on how to write fundraising copy, which is also a really useful one. So those are both really great. Books by Robert Caldini, and I'm probably going to spell his last name wrong. I think that's how you spell it. He has a book called Persuasion. There we go. Which is not specific to nonprofits, but is more about persuasive copywriting and things like that. You might find that one's interesting. There are a lot of business books on advertising and copywriting, things like that, all of which I think are really interesting and really useful. And if you want a longer, more comprehensive list, you can definitely send me an email, and I'd be happy to give you some of the ones that I've really found helpful over the years. Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that's helpful. So I do want to stick to the timeline I said we would and probably wrap up here. But I just want to say thank you to all of you for coming out and hanging out with me here today. It's been really fun to share some of these lessons with all of you. If you have questions or just want to connect with me after this, I'd be happy to talk with any of you anytime. You can send me an email to Vanessa@thestorytellingnonprofit.com if you'd like to connect. I will also be back here next Tuesday at this very same time with another episode of Summer Fundraising. I am not quite sure what we're going to talk about yet, but I'm going to figure that out tomorrow. So if any of you have special requests for topics you'd like me to chat about, maybe we'll talk about fundraising, copywriting, or something like that, and go a little bit more into some of the mechanics of that, but also open to suggestions. So anyways, in the meantime, really appreciate all of you coming out today. It's been great to hang out with you. I hope you have a terrific rest of the day, and look forward to connecting with all of you next week. Take care, everyone.